Now, these sessions do have a sponsor, and this month's sponsor is Kingsman Editing. They sponsor my free newsletter, Electric Speed, and that gets them a mention in these free sessions. Kingsman Editing offers a free sample edit. I think it's for 5 pages. If you take a snapshot of that QR code, it will take you right to the page where you can submit your sample. And you can find them, the website at kingsmanediting.com. So my thanks to them for supporting this programming. All right, so let's get underway. This is just a little bit about Merle, and then I'll let her talk about herself a little bit if she wishes. Merle and I have been working together for a number of years now. We first met when she was about to launch the new edition of The Baby Decision, How to Make the Most Important Choice of Your Life. She's a clinical social worker and psychotherapist. And you've also got a Facebook group called the Decision Cafe that I know you run with a colleague. What else would you like to say about any of this and your experience?
Well, first I want to say I'm just so happy to be here because Jane, you've been so helpful to me. And yes, you did help me launch the Baby Decision in terms of some marketing ideas, but we started sooner because you helped me and my husband go figure out how all the mechanics of self-publishing, yes, how to steer away from the bad companies and find the right people. And that was really meaningful and helpful.
Excellent. Yeah, it was a pleasure to help you through that. And the book is beautiful. I highly recommend it. I don't have that decision to make anymore myself, but if anyone is in that position, I have gifted the book to people. So it's just a marvelous resource.
Oh, thank you so much. I will also add that I do coaching. So for therapy, I can only do it with Massachusetts residents, but I can coach people all over the world. And that's actually one of the most exciting things that happened with the 2016 edition is I've coached people in Europe and Asia and just all over. And it's so much fun to talk to people in other countries, including seeing in the most cases how much easier it is to be a parent if there is maternity and paternity leave, inexpensive childcare, if there are resources for families. So indeed, I've learned a lot from my international clients.
Wonderful. Okay, so let's move on to what brings us here today, which is Merle's latest challenge. And this is what she submitted to me when we first discussed doing the clinic. She says, as a 74-year-old coach, psychotherapist, and author, I wonder what my next project should be. I'm currently writing my second book about deciding whether or not to have children. It's going to be released in 2024, but I already have far more material than the second book can hold. So what next? And some of the ideas Merle has is write another book, What to Do When You and Your Partner Can't Agree on Kids, design workbooks for the existing books she'll have out, write a series of short books, or maybe not writing a book, but promoting and doing what I would assume would be community engagement and just making all of the existing work more visible. And she ended by saying, I won't live forever, keeping in mind that I need time to savor family, friends, and leisure. How might I achieve my 3 goals of offering solutions to beleaguered decision makers, sharing expertise developed across decades, and monetizing my knowledge to benefit my heirs? Merle, is there anything else you want to add to this?
Well, I would like to add that because I'm an introvert, I tend to do things in writing, and many people have talked to me about doing videos, for instance, and there are 2 particular areas where I've thought videos could be important contributions. One of them is to do a video or series of videos on couples who are disagreeing about whether or not to have a child. I could either do a small group of 4 couples, or I could do 2 couples at a time and zero in more, and then maybe also have a small group discussion. And the other thing is that for people who are younger than me, who are interested in doing the work that I'm doing in coaching and psychotherapy on parental decision making, maybe some video training would be useful to them. So I'm thinking about those things too.
Now, Merle, is video something that you've done in the past, like professional video editing, or have you prepared those sorts of materials?
No, I've never done any of that. I've been on a lot of national talk shows, news shows, and discussion shows. So in addition to YouTube videos have been made, from various talks I've given. So I have familiarity being in front of the camera, but I have
Yeah.
zero knowledge, technical knowledge.
And do you have family members or colleagues who you think would help with that, or you would just hire a professional?
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay.
One,
Okay.
one of my daughters, Marcella, is here today. The other daughter, Vanessa, has had some video training at Columbia University, where she's a fundraiser, and she's made lots of videos to promote White Horse Theater, which is the theater off Broadway theater company that she shares with her wife, Cindy. So I do have access to some of her expertise.
Ah, wonderful. That helps so much when you have someone you can go to like that.
Yes.
Okay. Well, so I just wanted to pull out those 3 goals at the end, which I find very interesting. Number 1, offering solutions to the beleaguered decision makers, sharing your expertise, and then monetizing that knowledge. And I wonder if you agree, if you were to do the first one really well, do you think the others would follow, or do you feel like there might be some conflicts among these goals?
It's a good question. I think they probably go together very well. I think the reason that I wrote these separately is that I don't want to forget anything. So, I just turned 74 years old. I'm clearly not going to live forever. And earlier on, I sort of tried to hide my age because I thought if people knew I was older than their grandmothers, they wouldn't want to listen to me. But participating in Reddit Fence Sitter has been so wonderful. And I've started just realizing, when I say I've been doing this for 40 years and here is what I've seen, and based on all of this, here is what I would recommend that you think about for your particular situation with your partner or whatever. Oh, good. Vanessa's here too. I didn't know that. So both of my husband Rocco is here too. Everybody's on a different computer screen.
Oh, the gang's all here.
So I started realizing people love it that I'm my age because they know that I started doing this work in my 30s. And if I've been doing this for 44 years, they can trust that I'm going to have some useful things to say.
Yeah.
So the idea of being able to share what I've learned over all of these years with young people who need it now is just really, really exciting and meaningful to me.
Now, for those who might not be aware of Fence Sitter, would you describe what that is and how you found it?
Sure. Okay. It's kind of a funny story. Fence Sitter is a chat group on Reddit that is made up of 4 sets of people who are leaning towards parenthood, people who are leaning towards child-free. These people are all trying to make decisions. And what makes this so special is that it also has people who are 4 to 7 years into living a confirmed child-free life, or 4 to 7 years into raising a child, or even more than one child. And the reason those people are here years after they made their decision is they said that when they were making their decision, even though therapists and coaches like me and books like mine were helpful, what helped them the most was people who could remember everything about how agonizing it was, how impossible it was to sleep, and just didn't know what to do. But they were so close to the decision that they were able on a very granular level to say, here's what I did, here's what to think about, here's an exercise in the baby decision to use, or so on. So it's a very generous group of people, and no one tries to convince anybody to be child-free or to have a child. They really, really listen to each other. So the way that I discovered it was I was just Googling the name of my book to see what might be out there that I didn't know about. And I saw a headline that said, "Thank you for getting me off the fence, Ms. Bombardieri." And it turned out this was someone who had posted on Fence Sitter, and there had been a really big response. So I said, oh, I've got to find out what this is. And I went there and I was just amazed. It's so rare that we're able to find a place and a way as we're older to reach so many people who are so eager to hear what we have to say. And those of us who are over 50, we've got a lot of wisdom. And if we can find the right ways to share it, it gives a lot of meaning to those years of struggling when we were learning and beginning to develop our careers and our writing. So that really matters a lot.
Well, Merle, you probably know I love sharing the story of you finding this Reddit community. I just think it's brilliant the way you found it, that you participated, that it's been so, I don't know, it just seems very fruitful and supportive, and exactly like and I think there's also this stereotype out there that, you know, Reddit, first of all, it isn't a place you would go to market and promote. That someone of your age wouldn't be able to do it effectively, but that's obviously not the case. Okay, so let me go back to my slides here. I just want, before we like really dig in here, I thought we should just, you know, talk about literary estates, and what happens to one's work after you die, and, you know, thinking about who's going to take over, or is it going to be donated? And there was a really great Authors Guild session. It's available for free on YouTube. I'll dig up the link and share it in the chat here in a minute. And Merle, you attended this, but could just to help us, you know, think realistically about what you can do or what you should do given what might happen after you pass. What's your planning as of today?
Okay, well, I've already discussed with my husband Rocco and my daughters Marcella and Vanessa, who are currently listening. And it's really great that everybody is willing to talk about aging and death, that even though it's kind of a sad topic, we can look at it together. And what I think makes sense is that Rocco not be the primary person, because, you know, he's getting old too. We certainly want Rocco to have access to any money related to the book while he's still alive. But we thought either Marcella and Vanessa together, or maybe one of them being the primary manager, but them working together. And each of them has different skills that are great for this. Marcella is a former Boston Globe reporter. She is a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress, and she's working on a book now about community colleges as the best opportunity for disadvantaged people to get to the middle class. So she's got a lot of publishing experience. And Vanessa is a fundraiser for Columbia. And I also mentioned White Horse Theater that she shares with her partner. And she's done a lot of marketing through the years. She's done a lot of marketing as a fundraiser for Columbia and a lot of marketing for White Horse Theater. So she's got all of that experience. She also has had some experience working with just estate planning with one of her in-laws. So between the two of them, in addition to the fact that they're willing to do this, they've got a lot of great skills too.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's great that they're here. I mean, it shows me that they're interested, they're invested. And it's so nice to know that you have someone who will look after that legacy. All right. So I want to start here with just kind of putting the most top of mind ideas on the table. I like to think about the opportunities you have available in terms of the faster column and the slower column. Now, when I'm talking with really early career writers, people in their 20s or 30s or 40s, people are, you know, they're in the first 5 years of their writing journey. I try to encourage a mix of the two things, because the faster things will help build visibility and platform, but the slower things have huge meaning and power and longevity, and the two work really well together. Now, Merle, you've already got books. You've got some of that power right there. I think, you know, the books have that power that will keep them going for many years to come. And you've been doing some of the faster.
I have one book and I'm writing my second one, just to clarify.
Yes. I'm just assuming there's already two, you know. So there's part of me that's very tempted to like nudge you over to the faster column, and to think about generating new material in the faster column. So that could be blogging, newsletters, Substack, which is kind of the best of both worlds in some regard, video series. Now, I've mentioned here short form. It sounded to me like you're thinking long form, which I would put on the right-hand side of the column, because it would require, I think what you discussed might require a little more editing and polish. And then discussion groups, which you've already been participating in. And then on the slower side, in addition to books, there could be a podcast or that video series. There could be in-person events if you wanted to do retreats. Although not advocating that, but I know a lot of people are interested in that sort of in-person coaching.
Right.
So what I'm thinking is, can you start with something that really appeals to you on the left-hand side, and then eventually work it into something that is in fact a book later on, or a workbook, or a self-study course. So you're essentially creating little cheese samplers, and then you get the whole cheese later on, or the big basket with everything nicely arranged, artfully arranged. So I've got kind of my pros and cons listed here. I don't know that you and I have talked about how you prefer to work, or if you're a fast writer. But to me, the pros to this approach would be you could do the work as time allows in small chunks.
Mm-hmm.
It still keeps you very visible and active in the community, engaged with the readers. But the drawback is that, it can take you longer, and maybe you prefer just focusing on one thing at a time. And what if something happens and you don't really ultimately complete what you wanted to complete on the short end? So you essentially end up with an unfinished work. You never reach something that would make the book. Do you have any initial thoughts?
Well, in terms of if I don't get to finish the book, what I've thought about is I'm working with a coach, Kathleen Fearon, and I'm using so she was trained by and actually one of the founders of something called Author Accelerator, which uses the founder's book, Jenny Nash's Blueprint for a Nonfiction Book. So for instance, the book that I'm writing right now, I have an extremely, extremely, extremely detailed outline, which includes what's the purpose of the chapter, how will the reader change, and why are they ready for the next chapter, and so on. That added to my daughter's writing abilities. And I'm in a novel group, even though I put down the novel to do nonfiction with some really wonderful people. And there's a particular person in that group who I think would be happy to participate in making plans to finish the book. She might not do the writing itself, but I think that so I think I have will work together to make the book happen. I will back up and say that the day that I finished the second edition of The Baby Decision, that every word was stored, I breathed a big sigh of relief. I just said, if I die tomorrow or tonight, I know that a whole new group of generations really is going to have the new material. Because when I wrote the first edition of The Baby Decision, I was just starting to do the clinical work and the coaching. And so from then in 1978 to 2016, when this came out, I had learned volumes and volumes and volumes from my clients, from my workshops and so on. And I just needed to put that in a form that they could benefit.
Yeah.
So that was really a big drive. And I feel that too, and, I did talk about, I want to have a balanced life. I want to, enjoy my family and my grandchild and nature and travel. But at the same time, I feel a real pressure to finish. Yes. So it's really difficult to balance it all.
It is. It's very difficult. I just want to quickly address a question that Karen's asked about the advantage of Substack versus Medium, because I have very deliberately mentioned Substack here. I won't go into all of the reasons why, but I do want to warn people about Medium. I don't think that platform is long for this world. So it's not where I would be building or writing or publishing unless I already had a lot of investment there for some reason. So to start there from scratch today, I couldn't possibly encourage that. And at Merle, I don't think you've been using Medium, have you?
No, I haven't.
Okay. Yeah.
No, so I've struggled enough just to write my own blog posts. And I have to confess, even though you featured one of my newsletters a couple of years ago as an example, I'm doing a newsletter that's coming out next week, and it's going to be my first in at least 2 years.
Oh
So
no.
the idea of trying to write something for Substack in addition just feels like too much.
Okay. Well, um, that makes me feel like I should probably skip this next slide, but I'll go ahead and do it anyway.
Oh no, we can all no, we can all learn from it. Let's do it.
So I just wanted to kind of put in concrete terms what this might look like if you did indeed choose Substack, which, you know, for those of you who don't want to use Substack, that's fine. You could substitute email newsletter or blog. I think it's really kind of the same thing. But what makes Substack helpful in this particular context is that there's some monetization. And it's very clear, like a very clear path to monetization from my perspective. So what I'm thinking is you would probably have a free post every week, and it could be, I don't know if it would be a full chapter necessarily, it might be part of a chapter. And then there's some sort of premium or paid level where people get something extra. I don't know what that extra thing should be. There are a lot of different things that people do. Sometimes people have supplementary exercises or worksheets, or there's a small group discussion every so often about what you've posted. There might, usually people who pay are the ones who can comment and ask questions. So that's another way to monetize. Or they have access to an audio edition, or, you know, just premium stuff, in other words. And then what I like about this is, you know, you're moving closer and closer to the finish line, and you have evidence of that progress. And then once you're done posting everything, you've already gotten it out there, right? So you have kind of that immediate gratification of like, I'm already helping people. And then you have the final legacy piece of putting it all in a book in a more polished form. Just by coincidence, there's a pretty significant author, Ted Gioia, who I've got mentioned here, who is doing this himself on Substack. He's published so many books. He's known for writing about jazz. He's a music guy. And so for those who are, you know, curious about the argument for this, he has a really nice post on 10 reasons why he's publishing his next book on Substack. And I've seen other people do similar things. Now, I want to add the caveat, if there are any fiction writers in the room, I don't really recommend this for fiction, but for nonfiction, especially of the type Merle's writing, I think it works really, really well. What do you think, Merle, so far?
Well, I'm thinking that I'm doing these things partially. And actually, I'll tell everybody, Jane and I are having a consultation. I mean, I'm having a consultation with Jane next Friday, so I'll have a chance to talk more about the pros and cons of this. But I'm thinking that what I'm already doing in terms of, I just told my newsletter subscribers that they are going to be a VIP sneak peek group. So I will put up sections of chapters in the newsletter and give them the opportunity to read what people who aren't subscribers have no access to, and also give them an opportunity to make suggestions and comments, and to have them, you know, involved in creating the book and looking forward to the book, and, you know, good for word of mouth and so on. And I already have, in terms of discussion group, my Facebook Decision Cafe. It's small. It has about 300 members, but it's intimate, and people are very active in commenting. So I have that going on too. So if I were going to do Substack, I would need to think about, would I be doing everything I'm doing now plus that? Would Substack be better in some ways in terms of consolidating?
Yeah. I wouldn't advise adding this on top of. It would be instead of, or switching platforms. I had a fascinating consultation last year with let's just say a fairly well-known conductor, orchestral conductor, who he is about the same age as you, Merle, and he's thinking about his legacy, and he's published his books already, and he's like, I've done that, and now I want to do this other thing that's not particularly commercial. I don't care about having it in book form, and I want it to be interactive. Like, he was really craving conversation around what he was going to be writing about. And we ended up landing on this Substack model
Uh-huh.
because it gave him kind of the freedom to put a lot of this stuff out there because he wants it to be talked about and consumed in public forums. But he also has this premium level. I don't know if he's started it yet, but he wanted to have a premium level where people would actually get some coaching from him about what he was writing about. Anyway, he was just, it was just very gratifying to find Substack as a solution to exactly what he wanted, and he hadn't heard of it before. Juliana is wondering about Patreon, which I just want to address that quickly because it is a very similar model in that you get people to pledge money on a monthly basis, and then they get certain rewards in exchange. And I think Patreon's a great tool if you already have some loyal people and you have ready like tiers of support that make sense. The drawback with Patreon is that it's not really a publishing platform, and Substack is. So, and for Merle in this situation, I think that's pretty important because I think for discoverability and for marketing, Substack has, like, once you publish something on Substack, it becomes searchable in Google. And so new people could find Merle from this activity. Whereas on Patreon, I mean, it's all behind a wall, you know, and it's not really, people aren't going to discover you there. It would be very challenging for people to discover you there. And I'm looking forward to Merle doing something that would bring in more people over time. Okay. Just a second. So I think the questions for me about whether you would want to do this or not would be, well, does it sound like fun? Because that's what I would be prioritizing what's fun at this stage. Also, how fast you can write. So some people's writing and publishing process just doesn't fit the Substack model. Some people don't like creating in public view. They want to keep everything kind of, you know, well, private, and then they only want to release something that's very polished. I don't know that that applies to you, Merle. You seem very comfortable writing in public. What is that true?
That is true, both on Fence Sitter and in the Decision Cafe. I can just respond quickly, and you know the grammar may not be perfect. It may not have the precision and the granularness of what I would publish in a book, but I know that the ideas, that people are eager for the ideas,
Yes.
and that it doesn't have to be perfect to really hit home and give them exactly what they need today or tonight in a talk with their loved one or their meditation, trying to figure this out.
Yeah. And I wonder if the engagement, like the discussion, the back and forth, the commenting could in fact result in something better at the end. But I think the big question here is, at least when I encounter writers struggling with some of these choices, some people just want to write, the just right option. You know, they don't want to deal with the engagement or with the distraction that can come along with creating in public, which I totally understand.
Yeah, well, the engagement is really important to me. The interactions are just so satisfying. And I should actually say here, the reason I decided to write a second book on this topic that I've already written on is in communicating with 50,000 fence sitters, answering questions that weren't in the book or only touched on the book, such as climate change and fair role sharing, and the fact that this generation is much more terrified of pregnancy than previous generations. I started realizing I've either got 2 paragraphs in the baby decision or no paragraphs. And so I start to refer people to the book and then realize it's not in the book. And so I realized that there needs to be a new book that answers these questions thoroughly enough. So it was really the fence sitters that led to my decision to write another book. And when I shared it with them, they were wonderful. You know, there were like 900 responses, and it was really lovely.
I mean, this is what I love about writing online, is that feeling of community, the feedback, the engagement. Like, to me, that's what makes it worth it. I still, after 15 years, love blogging. Like I love getting up in the morning and knowing there's a new blog post or there's a new newsletter or whatever it is that I put out. Because book publishing is so slow.
Yes,
And you don't often hear anything for a long time. So,
true.
okay. Well, I do want to talk about the just right option as well, especially for people who are attending and wondering, about the pros and cons there, making the best of it. If you were to do the just right option, I would say, well, you're going to focus on producing books. Whether they're short or long makes no difference, but basically finished things. I also wonder, and this idea comes from the School of Life. Are you familiar with the School of Life?
Yes.
You are?
Yes.
Okay. So they do a lot of card decks. I own a few that help you grapple with a very specific life issue or problem. Or they're just, to have more meaningful conversations with family and friends. They have wonderful products. I get inspired just kind of browsing through their store. I have a little screenshot here of their store. Something else that they do, I admire their business model and I talk about them a lot. They break up all of their books. Like any book you find in their store, it's broken up and available in very small pieces on their website. Now, they're not necessarily the easiest to find on the website because they're meant to be found through search. And then they also send out a newsletter that, has direct links to those articles. So I think there's a corollary here where you could do something similar with any book that you publish. And then you would be upselling the packaged, polished versions of those things.
Mhm.
So have you ever thought about, you've clearly thought about doing something interactive like a workbook.
Yes.
But I think there's also room for card decks and other things, although there are obviously some production issues. It's not the simplest thing, but
Right. No, I have thought about card decks. I thought that would be interesting and might be a lot of fun.
yeah. All right. Let me see. So I think the pros and cons here, it's very well defined. You're focusing on work that's likely to last the longest. You're going to concentrate on the comprehensiveness and the quality, but the drawbacks I think are clear. If this is the path you go down, it's just less community engagement, or maybe you would find ways to work that in, continue what you're already doing on Fence Sitter, for example. But if you were to just focus on producing the books or the workbooks or whatever, at some point you may expire and then someone else is going to have to pick that up, although that's going to happen on the other path too. So either way you go. All right. So the next, I think that those are I'll just pause there and say that's kind of the bulk of my formal suggestions or the way that I would think about this decision. I think I'm sure you know this, so much of this is, I think, personality driven. And, there's some authors I speak to where they want to keep things as simple as possible, and they just want to focus on the one thing. They don't want to be distracted by multiple projects in progress. So I think you could, try to balance both sides of this equation. But I'd love to hear from you about where you're feeling the most, where you're worried you're going to have to compromise or sacrifice, I suppose.
Well, when I think about Substack, it overwhelms me because it's already, effort to do what I'm doing with Fence Sitter and with Decision Cafe. And I understand you say I could transfer it all to one program. That's certainly something I can look at. I also have the issue that I am doing consulting and psychotherapy. And again, because of my sense of time and that I'm not going to live forever, I'm starting to turn away people who aren't coming to me specifically for that topic, because there are not that many people who have this expertise. There are a few others in this country, but not a lot. And so if I'm going to work with other people on other topics, just like general anxiety or depression, or I've done a lot of hypnosis, medical situations and stuff like that, there are just a lot of people other people who can do that. But I generally see about 9 people, either couples or individuals a week. And I'm wondering if I may need to cut back on that a little bit.
That's a lot.
Especially if I'm really hoping to have the rough draft of this new book done by December 31st.
Yeah.
And although I do sometimes take 2 weeks off to not see clients and just write, I may need to do a bit more of that in the near future.
So do you continue with the client work simply because you enjoy it?
Well, I do enjoy it. I love it. It also is a source of income. So to give it up entirely would not only make my clients unhappy, but it would mean less in the wallet.
Yes.
So I definitely need to be doing some of that. So
Okay.
it's a lot to try to sort out what is the balance.
Yeah. And aside from the client work, I'm curious how many hours are on the client work versus the writing, the engaging, the marketing, and the promoting?
It's probably maybe half and half. It's a little hard to say because I had a medical issue and we also just became snowbirds, and so we had the moving transition and so on. But I guess I would say that the combination of writing and marketing is more typically 12 to 15 hours a week. So it
Okay.
is more than the clinical and the coaching.
And currently, do you just feel like you don't have enough time for everything you want to do?
I do. I would like to be making progress faster on the book.
So how would you feel if you did focus on the just writing the book, and if what comes after that is, I mean, workbooks sound very, like, just from a publisher perspective, like if I put my editorial hat on, I really like the idea of workbooks, supplementary materials, things of that nature. Is that what's your next favorite thing after that, after the second book?
The workbooks I think of more as being useful than that I feel excited about them. I guess what I now feel most excited about the next book would be a book that's entirely devoted to couples who are disagreeing about this topic, because the people who are going through that are really having a hard time. I've just been on a couple of talk shows on that topic. And in a typical week, there are at least 5 fence sitter comments where people are struggling with their partner.
Yeah.
So I think there's a real need for that. And someone just wrote in Decision Cafe, is there anything besides Merle's tug of war chapter that offers guidance on what to do if you and your partner disagree? So I think there's probably a need for that. Now, I don't know how many people out there have that. So I don't know from a marketing point of view if the numbers support that. But I think in terms of the eagerness of my potential readers, I think there'd be a lot of interest.
Now, how quickly do you think you could write that book? That's probably unfair.
Well, I think it would take at least a year, probably more like a year and a half or 2 years. So maybe that's really not the best way to go. Maybe
part of what I'm wondering, it actually brings me to one of my final points, or formal points, I should say, is that if you've already been addressing that particular question on Fence Sitter or in Decision Cafe, podcasts, interviews, talk shows, I would be saving every single little bit of that and putting it into your book file, so that when you're ready to sit down and write, you've got a huge head start. And maybe you already do this. Do you already do it?
Yeah, well, I'm already doing it with Fence Sitter, but I've just recently been on 2 podcasts where the podcasters have told me they're going to send me the complete transcripts of the interviews. So that will be material that can go right into either this book or a future book.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, but based on what we've discussed over the last, half hour or so, I'm feeling like the just right option may be the best, because Substack maybe too big of a detour because I'm already familiar with your assets and the things that you have. You've got a great website already. You've already got your email newsletter up and running. So just continuing that probably makes more sense to me than trying to develop some sort of like free premium tier on Substack and it feels like it might be overcomplicating things.
Right.
Okay. What questions do you have for me?
Well, I would like to hear more about the literary estate, if we could talk about that, because when you wrote me and asked permission, I thought we might talk a little bit more about that.
Oh,
And I do
sure.
have my husband and my 2 daughters here, and they're going to be the primary people involved in this. So anything further that you can share that will be food for thought for our family and for listeners thinking about their families or other people that they would ask.
Oh, gosh.
Right.
Where should I begin? Is there a specific aspect to it that you wish you knew more about, or so that I know where to focus or you're just generally wanting my
Just general.
take?
I will say that listening to that YouTube from the Authors Guild was really helpful, but overwhelming. I've actually listened to it twice and was able to understand more the second time. But it is so complicated. It's not just using your regular estate planner to say something about the literary products. It's copyrights, where the physical files are for future publishing. It's extremely complex. So there's just a lot to learn. And, we all need courage to look at this because none of us want to think that we're going to die someday.
Yes. So probably a first step for anyone listening, and I imagine, Merle, you've already done this, is to catalog everything you've got.
I have not.
Because your family members just will not, they will not know. They love you, but they're not keeping track typically. So, and by everything you've got, it's the books part that's usually easy. The books are sitting on your shelf, they're very identifiable. But often there are magazine pieces you've published or journal articles or these shorter things that have accumulated over the years that could be very valuable and that they should know about. I think, am I remembering right that you had a column somewhere? Did you write for I don't know if it was Psychology Today or somewhere else?
No, I have a column in my newsletter called Ask Merle, where I take a particular question that people have asked and answer. And when I was clinical director of Resolve, the National Infertility Organization, I had a column called Glad You Asked, in which I answered a specific question. But in terms of the newspaper magazine world, no.
Okay. So the books, the short stuff, and then there's the whole vast world of digital media that you may, wherever you're engaging. So, even the stuff that you post on places like Fence Sitter, I mean, you own the copyright to that.
Right, right.
So you would want to make sure that everyone's aware of where have you been posting. If you're very disciplined, I would be copying and pasting that material somewhere that you're archiving it. This could be it could be in Scrivener if you're a Scrivener user. It could be Notion if you like note-taking tools like Notion or Evernote. But really, the only rule here is that it's all in one place. It's not scattered over multiple devices in disconnected folders that you have that just say writing. So the more specificity and detail, the better, and the more your heirs are going to be able to do something with it. The social media accounts and cloud storage, website, email newsletter, all of those things, aside from the content, you also want to make it easy for people to get into them. Most of these places have at this point some sort of when I die option, like this is who you should give access to. Do you use a password storage manager? Like it would like LastPass or something like that?
Yes.
Those are really invaluable.
Dashlane. Okay. Yeah, Dashlane.
So I imagine Dashlane has something about, the LastPass has something like if someone if someone attempts to get into your account because you've died, like I don't know, there are just lots of settings that allow other people to access all your passwords upon your death or disability. And so
Yeah.
I really recommend that.
I had never thought of that until I saw the video. So that's definitely something to take.
Yeah. So that's kind of step one, is just the cataloging of everything that you have. And you don't want to forget formats that might be out there, like audio, German translation, which I know you have. So these things, be as detailed as possible about what's being sold and where the checks are coming from and how often, whether that's from a publisher, a distributor, whomever, so that they know what to expect or what to look for. And then obviously you want to think about who's going to be taking care of that estate. So are you going to select a person? Is it going to go to your spouse? Is it going to go to an organization? Will it be donated? So for example, I'll share with everyone that if I should get hit by the proverbial bus tomorrow, all of my intellectual property I'm donating to the Authors Guild.
Lovely.
I have no children. There's not a single family member who wants to manage that. and frankly, I think a lot of the information will go out of date pretty quickly.
Right.
So maybe the Authors Guild can make use of it. If not, no harm. So you want to, sometimes it takes a while to think through what you want to see happen. And I've always felt like when I die, my business dies with me. I don't want to see the business continue in any way. That's not how I've built it. But other people may feel differently and they would like that business to continue in some form. So other things to think about. I have seen some really intelligent planning by authors who have these long-lasting guidebooks where they find a co-author well before their expiration date, and that co-author starts getting in on the action, on the editions, and they're credited and they start drawing the royalties. And then when the originating author dies, essentially that book becomes the co-author's book. And then they keep updating it and issuing it. I think that can
That's
be
interesting.
Very this would mostly apply to books like yours, to nonfiction books, to guides that are evergreen, but should probably also be updated from time to time.
Updating. Yes. Yeah. Oh, that makes sense.
And then you'll also just sometimes a lot of what estates handle have to do with permissions, licensing. So like if people want to use aspects of the book, someone has to agree and accept or decline and then negotiate the agreement. So, all of those things, there needs to be some preparation for how to handle that, and also know what your wishes are if there are things that you do or don't want done with your material.
Right. So I think Marcella and Vanessa, my daughters, and Rocco, my husband, will all talk about this together. And then we'll consult. One of the things I learned in the Authors Guild video is that we all need someone who can do our general estate planning, but most of those people can't do literary estate planning. So I need to consult with someone else and have that person consult to our estate planner to coordinate everything. But I think I'll work better with that person if the four of us have talked basically about what we're thinking about before we have the consult.
Yes. And I didn't point this out because sometimes I just assume people have this knowledge, but when you die, copyright does not die with you. It continues for 70 years.
70 years.
So we're talking like it could outlive your children. Your copyright could. So it's really important to think through who's going to benefit from that, and that it doesn't get wasted. Like it has a lot of power and benefit left in it. Just checking the chat. Go ahead.
Oh, I actually have another issue or question, and that is thinking about having a virtual assistant. Someone in the chat I noticed mentioned, what about having a ghostwriter do the workbooks? So I think it's interesting to think about, are there other people who can help me do the
Yes.
work?
I love that idea. I think it would be marvelous to have someone do derivative works, is what I would call it. The workbooks, things that are really just taking what you've already written and then changing it in some way, whether that's a workbook, a card deck, an illustrated something or other, a graphic novel, etc., or even videos.
Right.
So yes, if I think that would be terrific. I do. One reason I didn't suggest it is because collaborations can be challenging. But I think you might have someone like I don't know if the person you collaborate with on the Facebook group would be helpful there, but if you already have someone like in
Yes,
your neck of the
actually, she
woods,
could be. Yes.
yeah, then yeah, absolutely, I would encourage it. As long as you're comfortable giving up some control.
Right. Yeah. And with the virtual assistant, I know it's hard to find someone. So maybe next week we can talk a little bit about how to look for
Yeah.
one, and whether I need more than one, maybe one who helps me with just overall logistics, and another one who could, for instance, help me post on Instagram. I have not participated much in Instagram, and actually I was on a pod Healthier Together, where 100 people are starting to follow me on Instagram because they heard this podcast.
Oh, goodness.
So, I
Yeah.
need to get over there, and I don't know where I'm going to find the time or the skills.
Yeah.
So I could definitely use some help.
I mean, this is another thing I didn't really push because I think it could become a distraction, but I think you would be brilliant on TikTok. And now I'm not saying you necessarily have to be the one figuring out TikTok or deciding what the video should be, but if you had an assistant, who already understands the platform and looked at your book, I think they would be able to come up with hundreds of ideas for how to create little videos based on what you have already done. And
That would be great.
it would open you up to a whole new audience, I imagine. So yeah, more ideas than time. Any other questions from you, Merle?
Well, I did want to share just a little bit of the conversation that Jane and I had in email, because when she asked me if I had thought about literary estate and whether I was willing to have it be a topic, she said, "I know this is kind of morbid." And I wrote back and I said, "I don't really consider it morbid, because if we acknowledge that we're going to die and we plan for it, then we get to enjoy the time we have left and make sure we're using it in the best possible way."
Thank you. You're absolutely correct. I hope everyone is thinking now about these decisions and playing an active role in them. It's important. All right, I'm going to just take a look at the Q&A. We do have some time left. I see there's a ChatGPT question. I just want to acknowledge that it's there, but I don't know that I'm prepared to speak about it during this session, but it's an important issue, but for another time, perhaps. Becca wonders, in planning the outline of your work, if you don't have anyone who would be willing or capable to complete it, do you have any suggestions on how one could assure that it is completed? I mean, my only thought there is you've got to identify someone in advance, but even that's not foolproof. I mean, there are all sorts of, like, people could just decide after the agreement or after you pass that they're no longer interested because life happens. So yeah, I don't have a good idea or suggestion for you, Becca. Merle, do you have any thoughts?
Well, I think just thinking about people who value your work, and whether it might even be an author who has a similar topic, that if they really like your book, could consider it really satisfying and meaningful to complete that for you.
Yeah. We have someone who's wondering about Substack. If you're planning to self-publish, use Substack and then polish later into a full book. This person's wondering, what if you're going to be looking at agents or publishers later? Does publishing on Substack kill your chances at getting picked up? No, not necessarily. There are many Substack writers who have leveraged their success there into traditional book deals. Although interestingly, what I find is if someone's super successful doing that, sometimes a book deal becomes less attractive. But the one example that comes to mind right away is Casey Johnston. She's a female bodybuilder who started a Substack giving advice to other women on strength training and also kind of like destroying myths surrounding bodybuilding and weight loss. It's a brilliant Substack. In fact, she's been so successful, she might have left Substack to do it on her own website. She has a book deal, and I can guarantee you like half, if not most of that book is simply going to be polished, revised versions of what she has already written. And that's just the natural way of things. It was the same with blog to book deals in the mid 2000s. So yeah, I wouldn't worry about killing your chances. You're just building a platform for the book. Another Substack question, Judy wonders if Substack allows for reposting. So taking material from other blogs and reposting them on Substack. I know Medium does, which is why I ask. I mean, you can, but I don't know why you would do it. I don't know that it will necessarily be helpful unless you're just trying to kind of game the Substack system in terms of getting more recommendations or marketing through that platform. If it were me, I would just commit to one or the other, either commit to doing Substack or commit to doing your own blog. So part of this is a strategic choice and where you want to build your empire. Anne says, in my experience, self-publishing card decks is hard to make cost effective. Do I have any tips on that? And I know Anne very well, and I have seen her card deck in the past, and I know she is speaking from experience. This was very tough during the pandemic because sometimes for special projects like that, it's most effective to produce them overseas where the costs are cheaper. So that would be like my first idea, but there is like a lot of there's a lot of knowledge that goes into knowing how to source production and printing for these sorts of things. Now, if I myself were going to do a card deck today, I would probably start studying the School of Life card decks just because I see that they're very high quality, and I would start asking questions about how did they do theirs. But aside from just having the highest or the most efficient unit cost, what would I do? You could do pre-orders to help fund the production of the card deck if you couldn't pay for it out of pocket. What else could you do? Just charge a really high price. If people want it, they'll pay the price. I don't know what School of Life is charging, but it's not cheap. It's like at least $20, if not more, for those card decks. So yeah, I hear you, Anne. It's not cheap, but it might work in some situations. Let's see. I know we're running out of time, so I just want to see if there's anything I definitely want to answer. Oh, Lane is wondering, Merle, if you hired a publicist, or if you didn't, how did you get on talk shows?
Okay. What happened was I thought about hiring a publicist, and I knew it was going to be a fair amount of money, so I wasn't sure whether it made sense to do it or not. But I did talk to Jane, and Jane recommended a couple of people. And the first person didn't work with self-published books, but the second one, Claire McKinney, did. And it was several $1,000s. I do think it was worth it. And because at the time that the book was coming out, that was when Trump was the only person on any news shows or anywhere in the media. So it was a really hard situation. You know, Claire and her staff were very clear about that. But what she did manage to do, which was really great, was she was able to get me into a lot of second tier things, some national radio shows, an online magazine about couples work, a few blog magazines for young women, et cetera, et cetera. And that, I think, got the word out enough that when I was interviewed by the Washington Post, when I was interviewed by the New York Times, when the NPR show in LA, Air Talk, found me recently, having all of that stuff up on my website, or that people could find just by doing a Google search, I think really helped to spread the word about the book. And of course, a New York Times article and a Washington Post article are gold.
Yes, yes. There are a couple questions from people asking about card decks, and so I'm going to put a link into the chat so people can get an idea of what I'm talking about. I'm just going to link to School of Life, which is my preferred place for this sort of thing, so people know what we're talking about. But, you know, like, it's not so different from just like a deck of playing cards or a tarot deck. But usually they're bigger. They're not as small as like playing cards. And some of them are very highly designed, but they're usually some sort of exercise or prompt, something to spark conversation. Obviously, it depends on the purpose of the card deck. So I hope that helps people get a more concrete idea of what we're talking about. Let's see if there's anything else. Cindy wonders, in reality, do you think all authors should have estate planning in place? I do, assuming you have intellectual property. So things that are published and earning money, for sure. If your work is entirely unpublished, I don't know. I mean, it depends on so many factors. There are some authors whose work is only published after the fact due to the sweat, blood, and tears of family members. So if you think that there is someone in your family that's going to be very invested in that, then I would think about taking steps. But as soon as you've got a book on the market, or you're making money off of your words, I think you want to consider who is going to help manage that when you're gone or disabled. Okay, well, that takes us to 2 o'clock, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Merle, is there any last question that you have before we go?
Well, I just want to make sure that people can find me. So they can find me on my website, thebabydecision.com. They can also find me on mindmed.com.
Great. I put your link right into the chat.
Thank you so much.
And Merle, thank you so much for taking time to do this and being so open with your planning.
Well, you're welcome. It's been such a pleasure. It's always a pleasure talking to you. You have such depth of knowledge, but your warmth and your sense of humor and your expansive, creative brainstorming, just putting all that together, it's just such a pleasure. I was really honored to come, and I really hope that other listeners have gotten great information for their own work.
Thank you so much, Merle. And this is,
Thank
I think, it's a topic near and dear to my heart, on an existential level.
Yes, absolutely.
So
yes, there's actually a lot of existentialism that I'm putting into my new book, because the awareness of death helps people think about how they want to spend the rest of their lives, whether that's with a child or not.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, thank you, everyone, for honoring us with your time and attention today. Thank you, Merle, and I hope to see you all again soon.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you so much. Bye, everybody.